Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Hanimtsoim. Today is Shushan Purim here in Mamat Bet Shemesh. I'm sitting in my apartment here, the day after Purim. And I don't know about you, but I'm certainly feeling like, what happened here? I'm scratching my head. What happened to Purim? Purim came in and came out like a blitz. And you feel, what happened? Did I get hold of Purim or not? In some ways, I think maybe Purim is one of the greatest casualties of all the Yom Tovim that we have. Let me explain what I mean. No one makes a mistake when it comes to Pesach, the preparations that you made, and you sit there for 8 days eating your matzah, and afterwards you have an Isur Chag. So the point is taken. You can put finger on the pulse. You can sense exactly what the Yom Tov is all about. And certainly after Pesach, you have the days of the Omer leading up to Shavuos. And Shavuos has a great preparation for it, the days of the Omer. And at least afterwards, I know here in Eretz Yisrael, you have something called 7 days of Tashlumin, when we don't say Tachnun, meaning there's a certain foldover. You walk away gradually and carefully from Shavuos. You feel the Yom Tov, Matan Torah, and you understand and appreciate what Shavuos is all about. Certainly, Lo Aleinu, when it comes to Tisha B'Av, Lahavdil, there are 3 weeks of preparation, and the week of Tisha B'Av and Erev Tisha B'Av. You know exactly what you're doing when it comes to Tisha B'Av. You're sitting on the floor and you're crying over the Churban Beis Hamikdash and Silo Kashchina. You sense the Yom Tov. You pick up the point, and it's not missed. Certainly when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, the whole month beforehand, and the month of Elul, you understand exactly, no one makes a mistake about Rosh Hashanah, Miyichyev, Miyomus, Hamelech, and all the different tefillahs that we have. You get the point quite clearly. Yom Kippur is certainly not forgotten or mistaken. Days of Tshuva beforehand, and one stands them without eating. You understand the Yom Tov and you pick it up quite clearly. And straight after Yom Kippur, you feel the Simcha, Zman Simcha Sein of Sukkot. I'm saying, and Chanukah also is 8 days. But Purim is something which is almost sometimes a tragedy. I know people say that, meaning it goes in and goes out and you lose it. Tanis Esther certainly puts you in a frame of mind, but it's such a powerful, important Yom Tov. And as they say in the words of the Shloah HaKodesh, the Arizal says, Yom Kippurim, that Yom Kippur is like Purim. It's unbelievably powerful, prominent festival which we have, Purim. And yet it gets lost, no? It gets missed out. You don't feel the mood of it completely. It's such a powerful Yom Tov. I mentioned in a previous shir that the Yerushalmi brings out a statement of Rabbi Yochanan. He says that L'osid Lova, in the future, all the Yom Tovim will disappear or be diminished in importance, except for Purim will stay. And all the Megillas which we have and the writings which we have in the Ksuvim and the writings of Tanakh will also be less important. But Megillas Esther will always stay with its prominence. So what is it, Rabbi say? What did we miss? What is there that we should take out of Purim that maybe we didn't get hold of? And therefore I've called this shir Clarity of Vision after Purim, meaning after the point. Let's stand back and think, what exactly did I acquire? How did I change? How did I move on? Did I really do what they say, Kabbalah Satoy Ba'ava? Did I receive the Torah in Ava, meaning as against Shavuos, where it was forced upon them? Is there something which I missed? Did I take out from Purim what I really should have taken out? And that's really the clarity of vision, which I'd like to discuss here in this year. To take out from Purim something which is a real message, which we can walk on. And it didn't just come in and go out with the Razam Mataz and all the Hefkevas and all the Balagan which we have. Did I really take out of Purim as I'm supposed to take out of it? I think the day later, that's why I'm sitting here today on Shushan Purim, I'm hoping that maybe we can grasp the Yom Tov and walk away from Purim with something of a possession, and we changed and move on, all because of Purim. I'd like to base these few words on a shir which I once heard from the great Gaon, Rabbi Yisrael Belsky, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha. He was a Rosh Yeshiva of Torah B'das. He was a phenomenal person, a multi-dimensional personality. I can't think of anything he wasn't skilled at. He was a moel, he was a shochet, he was a musician, he was an astronomer, he was an incredible posek. He had all the skills. I suppose we could say about Rabbi Belsky, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, he was something called like an eshkol. Everything was inside him. He once made the following comment, and I think it's very pertinent, and I think we can take that as something as the beginning of a vision, which I hope will give clarity and clarity exactly what we're supposed to move on from on Shushan Purim and move on from Purim in the following way. He asked as follows: what exactly was the fault of Klal Yisrael when it came to Purim? We know the Gemara brings down a comment of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai and explains as follows: Shenenu misudas Achashverosh. They benefited from the feast of Achashverosh. They shouldn't have done. What exactly is the crime? What did they do wrong? Maybe you'll turn around and say, the Gemara says maybe they ate non-kosher food, but it's not true, because la'ason ki'utzayin ish va'ish. All the mahadrin, all the hechsheim were all kosher. They were all glad kosher. Everybody had according to what they wanted, according to what they ate. Meaning, it couldn't have been because they ate from the food which was wrong. You also can't say it was because of agila arayas, of immorality. Why? Because we know quite clearly that there was a separate banquet which was made for the women. The men were on one side, the women on the other. Maybe you'll say women were walking around, maybe not dressed properly, but it doesn't say that there was any immorality there. So it wasn't because of that. And avodah zarah, maybe they were worshipping idols. Certainly the Medrash brings down that Achashverosh had furnished all the way around the rooms where the Jews were. There were idols around, but it doesn't say that they worshipped avodah zarah there. They were worshipping idols. We know from a previous misdemeanor of Klal Yisrael that they bowed down to the idol in the time of Nebuchadnezzar. That's true. That is then. But in this case, it doesn't say that. All it says is as follows, is Shenenu, they benefit from the banquet of Achashverosh. What exactly? Does the punishment fit the crime? If the punishment was lahashmid, laharog, la'abed, to annihilate, to make a holocaust of the Jews, which was really what Haman's gezerah was, which his decree was, what exactly was their fault? What did they do wrong? And maybe we can explain in the following way. And Rav Belsky brought this point out, which I think is very relevant. We see at the beginning of the Megillah, the Gemara explains that the purpose of the banquet was really because Achashverosh felt almost intimidated. He didn't feel important in that. And he made the banquet for 180 days, and the Megillah says as follows. The purpose of the banquet was as follows. B'haroiso, to show es oisher kavod malchusai, the riches and the honor of his monarchy, ve'es yukol tiferes geduloso, and the honor and the majesty of his greatness. Meaning, he wanted to show that he was a great king. That was the great point behind it. The Vilna Gaon, in his comment of the Megillah, explained as follows, that we know that the banquet took 180 days. We also know that in the previous monarchy, in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, he had stolen from Jerusalem 1,080 treasures from the Beis Hamikdash. He had stolen them. And we know as follows, that the banquet took 180 days. Says the Vilna Gaon, there were 6 descriptions here. Oishe kavod malchusoi, he wanted to show how important it was. There were 6 words which were used. And the Vilna Gaon explains that every day he took out a different treasure which he had captured from the Beis Hamikdash. As we know, Koresh took over from Nebuchadnezzar, and Achashverosh took over from Koresh. He had all the treasures from Nebuchadnezzar. And every day he brought out something else which was splendid. He wanted to show how powerful he was, how forceful he was, what it means by the monarchy of Achashverosh, and that was the purpose of the banquet. And maybe you'll turn round and say as follows. The problem with Klal Yisrael, they went and they were impressed. They were dazzled. They were amazed by the glitter, by the honor, by the majesty, by the treasures that he had. Maybe you'll turn around and say that when Achashverosh pulled them out, they didn't cry and they didn't weep when they saw the treasures brought out from the Beis Hamikdash. But it doesn't say that, Rabbi is saying to me. It doesn't say that. It was their nenu. They took a pleasure from it. They were benefited enormously from such opulence. It was opulence for the sake of opulence. It was materialism for that benefit. And that really was the fault, said Rav Belsky, meaning they took tremendous delight from looking at all the treasures. If you remember the Medrash we mentioned in the previous year, that Mordechai ran around at the banquet telling everybody to go home, and they didn't listen. They turned around, when do we have a chance to sit on a golden couch like this and drink wine like this and the music? And everything was so fabulous in materialism. And they stayed there and they took tremendous pleasure from it. They were, in other words, astonished by the majesty of the Umas Ha'olam, of Achashverosh. And that was the fault. Shenenu, that they took tremendous benefit from it, and they were amazed by it. And maybe what we can perhaps suggest as follows is this is the fault. Do you remember the expression when the spies came into Israel, and the Pasuk says, we felt like grasshoppers, and we were in the eyes of the residents of Canaan as grasshoppers. And maybe that was the point. They felt in some way amazed at what the Umas Ha'olam had, what the nations had, and they were awakened and amazed. They thought it was so fabulous. And once you think like that, maybe I can suggest something like this. It's something like Al Chet Shechotanu Lefanecha B'Simcha Levav. The amazement of what the nations had. When you become like that and you see something which is fabulous, and that's taking pleasure from it. We know in the history of the Jewish nation, at different periods of exile that we've gone through, there have been tremendous assimilation. Why? Look at the Greek Empire. People became amazed at theatre and sport and drama and culture, and we still have it today. Misyavnim, many people became Hellenists, meaning they were amazed at the theatre and the culture and the sport and all the beauty of which Yafet had to give, which Greece had to give. That was the fault. The fault is that they became Greek, even more than the Greeks themselves. They were amazed at the culture, and the assimilation grew from there. I don't know if you've ever seen the Sefer, which was written after the death of Hagon Rabbi Victor Miller, Zichron Levracha. A Sefer was written which was called Divine Madness. They were taken out of notes from Rabbi Miller. He didn't publish in his lifetime, but he wrote quite clearly, one of the greatest tragedies which happened in Europe before Germany was, they were more German than the Germans. They became so involved in the German culture in Berlin. I remember hearing Rabbi Wolber in the Mir Yeshiva, Zichron Levracha, explain, people were more German than the Germans in Berlin, and that was a problem. Once you become so amazed by the culture, and that was the fault, which was a problem in the time of Achashverosh. They were nenu, they had pleasure, and they saw something which they'd never seen before, and perhaps that was the fault. And that's what Belsky was mentioning here. The chait was to be drawn in and pulled in by the enormous culture and the beauty of the culture. I know myself, I come from England, and I remember seeing there were people who became even more English than the English. They should all be well and saved, and everybody should look after them in England. But you see people even more English. I remember I used to see somebody very often, and I walked in, I said to him, where's that tie from? He said, it's my tie from Oxford University. He never wore a different tie. He always wore the tie from as an Oxford graduate. Meaning, you such pride of the pageantry and the pomp and the circumstance and everything that there is in England. You get drawn in. What is the Queen wearing? I remember people used to dress a certain way, and they became so English. That's the problem. You become drawn into the culture, and that's what happened in Greece, that's what happened in Germany, and perhaps I'm saying also maybe in America. People get so drawn in and pulled in. In some ways, it's the same as Reb Shimon Bar Yochai mentioned in Shushan. Shenenu misudas Achashverosh. People have great pleasure from the culture, from the standards, from the materialism, from the opulence, from the affluence, from the study, from the beauty, from the culture, from the sport, everything which is there. And they get pulled in, and they say, we feel like grass. Without this, we're nothing. Without grasshoppers, if we don't behave like them. And this is a lifeline. This is really what I'm searching for. And these become the values in life. And that was the crime, and therefore the punishment was Nebuch, the Holocaust, which was supposed to have taken place, when you become so involved in the culture of the secular world. That is a problem. And I'm thinking to myself, isn't that really, Rabbi Isai, what we need in our time? We need clarity of vision, especially after Purim, to understand what went wrong in Purim and what must be put straight. We can't be too involved, we can't be too impressed, to become so involved in the culture, the glitter and the culture. But maybe we can take the words of Belsky a little bit further. I'd like to go a little bit deeper. We know that the cause of all the problems when it came to Purim is Amalek. Haman was from the family of Amalek. And the great, great problem with Amalek was, after the whole world was terrified and amazed at the crossing of the Red Sea, and every portion of water, as you know, became split and became divided up. And everybody was a Shamra Mimir Gozen, Chilochaz Yoshve Peloshes, we say every morning in Oz Yoshir. All the nations of the world became amazed at Klal Yisrael. Along came a nation from far away who had no problem against Klal Yisrael, but they came to be mezalzel, to abuse and debase all the standards of Kavod Shamayim, of the Almighty. Meaning, the purpose of Amalek was to be, in Hebrew they call it to mezalzel, to make low, to debase the qualities of Kavod Shamayim. And that was the great success of Amalek. The moshel is given, as you know, Rashi brings down, of a boiling hot bath. No one can go near the bath. Why? Because it's boiling hot. Along comes a Meshuggah and jumps in and shows it's not as hot as that. Meaning, no one would come near Klal Yisrael after Kriyas Yamsuf and after the miracles which happened in Mitzrayim. Amalek came along, and that's a problem. They debased the standards of Kavod Shamayim. And I'm suggesting really as follows, the following point. Take the first point, which Belsky had said. Belsky mentioned that they were to benefit from the culture, from the materialism, from the opulence of what Achashverosh had in his palace. For 180 days, each day he bought something else. Everybody was amazed at what Achashverosh had. But there's a certain outcome from that. And the outcome is as follows, that you begin to think there isn't much in Klal Yisrael, in the Torah Kedosha, and it's called a zilzul, and that's really Amalek. When you see something which is fabulous and it impresses you so much and makes such an impression on you by the nations of the world, you think less of the Kedusha of the Torah Kedosha, and that's what happens. The hardcore zilzul, the hardcore debasement came from Amalek, but I'm suggesting in our times, maybe we don't have something called the mitzvah of Mechias Amalek. I know the Chafetz Chaim, I think, had once said he believed that Trotsky was an Amaleki, and if he had the chance, he would have gone and killed him. So he said. But we must explain what that means. We don't nowadays have something called killing Amaleki, but what we certainly do is the impression and the atmosphere and the standards of Amalek still lead us to, in some ways, to be mezalzel, to make less of the greatness and the kedusha and the holiness and the great majesty and splendor of the Torah Kedosha. And that's what happens when you're so impressed with the nature and the culture and the values of the secular world. What happens is, it's a fraction, I don't know it is put, but it's something to do with Amalek. You think less of the Torah Kedosha, and that's what the problem is. The great Reb Chaim Friedlander, Zecher Tzadik Levracha, the Mashgiach of Ponevezh Yeshiva, wrote a beautiful maimer about this, and he called it, the words are so beautiful, they're onomatopoeic. He said there's something called Tishtush Hatachumim, which means really smudging of the frontiers, blurring the borders. It doesn't become clear anymore. You see something by the nations of the world, by Greece, by Germany, by America, by England, and therefore you become unclear. It's not clear. It's not sharp enough. The division between the nations of the world and the Torah Kedosha. And because of it, I'm saying also it's a fraction also of Amalek. You become to Mazal. You think less of the Kedusha of Torah Kedosha. And that tishtush, that blurring, that smudging makes an enormous impression on our future, on our values, and how we view what the Torah HaKadosh has to give us. I think that is the problem here. Our Mechias Amalek, our blotting out Amalek, is to make sure that we're clear, we're sharp, we're acute, we understand exactly this is the nations of the world, and this is the glory and the splendor of Klal Yisrael. And if we don't get that clear, we can make enormous mistakes in our life. And I think that is our Mechias Amalek, and that I think is the lesson, the clarity of vision after Purim. We must be very sure this is the nations of the world, this is their materialism, this is the pageantry in London, this is the American sport, the American scene, what we know of, all the different standards which we know of. This is literature, this is music, this is from the secular world, this is from Yovan, this is from Greece, this is from Amalek. But one must be very, very clear. There's something far, far greater and far more elevated and far more enlightening and far more inspiring, and that is the Torah HaKadosh. And that's what we have to recognize. If we don't get that clarity of vision, if we come tishtush means we're blurred, we're smudged, we don't see clearly exactly what are the borders. The frontiers become very much faded and they're foggy. We're dull. We don't see clearly what exactly is the splendor of the Torah Kedosha. I remember I was once coming out of the Mir Yeshiva. I was driving in a car and I turned onto Shmuel Hanovi right next to the Mir Yeshiva. As I was driving past, I saw the great Gaon Reb Moshe Shapiro Zecher Tzadik Levracha walking along. I stopped the car and I offered him a ride. And I said, can I carry the Rav anyway? He said, certainly. He jumped in the car and sat next to me. We drove down, passed by Zvil and passed by Shmuel Hanovi. And as we drove on, past Rechav Yechesk, all of a sudden, the police came along and pushed us all to the side. All the cars were pushed to the side of the road. And we had to stop at the side of the road. And what was clear was happening was there was a delegation of great politicians, of dignitaries who were coming past. At that time, it was James Baker. If you remember, I think he was the Secretary of State of George Bush, if I can remember correctly. And his car was driving past. So the police had pushed aside all the cars at the side, and the whole procession passed with all the police and their sirens and everything. And James Baker's car came right past. I remember I was sitting next to Reb Moshe. As the car of Mr. Baker passed, Reb Moshe turned around to me and said to me as follows, as his car passed, you've never been as close as that to the Avi Avois Hatuma, to the height of all uncleanliness. Such a beautiful comment. Meaning, the politicians with their beautiful dress, with their police around them and the Simons and everything. In reality, he called it the father of all uncleanliness, of all tumah, of all despicable things. Meaning, he made it quite clear to me, don't get blurred, don't get smudged, don't be impressed by all the dignitaries and the police and all the army around them. That's not what that's called. The Avi Avos. It's such a beautiful point to make. He was clarity, had clarity of vision. If anybody had clarity of vision, that was certainly Reb Moshe. And that's the point, to be very clear and sharp exactly what represents by Torah and what it means by the Ummah Yisrael. And I think that's what we need. That's how we walk away from Purim, I'm suggesting. That's a clarity of vision, without any tishtush, without any blurred, without any blurring, any smudging of the frontiers. And that's the purpose of the Shir Mitz Hashem. Before we go any further, I'd like to explain to you what is the meaning of the definition of Amalek in our terms. For that, we must turn to the writings of the Vilna Gaon in a sefer called Even Shleima. Even Shleima are different writings of the Vilna Gaon. In chapter 11, Perek Yud Aleph, the Vilna Gaon mentions as follows. Klal Yisrael are called Reishis Tuvua, the first of all produce. The nature, Rashi mentions it at the beginning of Bereshis, Reishis Tuvuasa, the first of all produce. The Vilna Gaon mentions as follows. We know quite clearly that there is a great deal of wastage when it comes to wheat. As follows. There's something called the straw, which holds up the wheat. Then there's something called, that's the teven. There's something called the moitz, which is the chaff, which is on the wheat. And there's something which is very close to the wheat, which is called the subin, the bran. You have straw, you have chaff, and you have bran. And then eventually you have the wheat inside. The Vilna Gaon explains that from the family of Avraham Avinu there was a great deal of wastage. He explains as follows. The straw refers to the family of Esav. We know that when Yosef came along, he was the fire which would burn up the straw against Esav. The teven, the straw, refers to Esav. The chaff refers to Yishmael. He was also a family of Avraham Avinu. Yishmael came from Avraham Avinu as well. So he's called the chaff. There's also wastage, but it's closer to the wheat itself. Then you have something called the bran. The bran is very, very close to the wheat itself. It's very close to it. And the Vilna Gaon explains as follows. There were 5 categories of what we mean by the subim, by the bran, and they are represented by the Erev Rav. They are members of the Jewish nation, but in reality they're strangers to the nation. They're very close. You think they're actually Jewish. They're part of Klal Yisrael, but they're called the Erev Rav. And the Gaon explains as follows. There were 5 categories of the Erev Rav in Klal Yisrael. The Vilna Gaon explains. And he says as follows. The 5 categories are all listed at the beginning of Sefer Devarim. The Pasuk says that Klal Yisrael b'midbar rava b'umas bein poron, bein toifel, v'lovan, v'chatzeres v'di zohav. The Vilna Gaon explains in his commentary on the Chumash in Aderes Eilu the following. Poron refers to those members of the Erev Rav, part of Klal Yisrael, who make tremendous machlokes and balei lashon hara. They cause tremendous problems. In reality, says the Vilna Gaon, that's where the spies were spent out. When the Bnei Yisrael went to the wilderness of Poron, that's where the spies were went out, meaning they spoke lashon hara about Eretz Yisrael. The first category of Erev Rav are members of Klal Yisrael, who are, in reality, they are part of Klal Yisrael, but they're balei machlokes, balei lashon hara. Bein Teufel refers to Tiflus. Tiflus means people are caught up with tremendous taiva. Taiva, desire, and immorality, they're caught up in that. They're also members of Bali, of Klal Yisrael. Lovon refers to people who appear to be white. They're charlatans, they're chameleons. They appear to be very righteous, but in reality they're not. That's also Erev Rav. Chatzeros refers to Bali Kovod, people who search only to make borders. Chatzeros, you mean to make an area. This is one, this is one. They divide, they make division in the Klal Yisrael. They make partition. They separate the nation. But these are people who are caught up by money. 5 categories of Erev Rav. But listen to this, Rabbi says the Vilna Gaon as follows. The first category, which are those who are balei machlokes, who cause great armaments and balei lashon hara, says the Vilna Gaon, are actually Amalekim in Klal Yisrael. What an awful situation. We actually have, says the Vilna Gaon, members of Erev Rav, people who are part of Klal Yisrael, but they're really Amalekim. Amalek is not from outside, says the Vilna Gaon. People who cause tremendous machlokes and balei lashon hara. They're mezalzel completely. They debase completely all the great standards of holiness and sanctity and splendor of Torah Kedosha, and they debase it all. And that really is hardcore Amalekim. It's inside Klal Yisrael. People who cause tremendous machlokes, and that is the nature. And that's where our tishtush comes. We see people in our nation who are part of the Jewish nation, but they cause tremendous arguments and machlokes and lashon hara, and they talk bad about people. Mainly they division, which we see, unfortunately, the great tragedy which we see in our nation as well. Balei machlokes, they're Amalekim. That's the point, which is a frightening thought. How startling. It's not that Amalek is outside Klal Yisrael. It's inside the nation itself. And that, I'm suggesting, Rabbi Isai, is where the real tishtush, where the real smudging comes on. When people make an argument, when people say Lashon Hara, in reality they're Amalekim, they're inside the Klalis, inside the nation. And that's where we need clarity of vision. We need to see very clearly, what does it mean exactly, the Kedusha, the holiness, and the sanctity, and the majesty of the Torah Kedusha, and be clear exactly, these are the nations of the world, and this is the Klal Yisrael. And that's where the clarity of vision is needed. I'd like to bring out to you, I was thinking, 3 different areas where we can see clarity, where we can avoid the smudging, avoid the blurring. I thought of 3 areas, Lanias Daiti, where we need clarity of vision, to make sure we understand exactly what does it mean, the nature of the Jewish nation. 3 different areas. But before I do that, what I'd like to do is share with you some words which I remember hearing from Rav Wolbe, the great Mashgiach. I used to hear him. I had the tremendous privilege to go and hear him in the Beis HaMusa in Yerushalayim when I lived in Yerushalayim. And also I heard many of these points also from his Maimon, which would give in the Mir Yeshiva every other week in the Mir Yeshiva. Before we go into these 3 different areas where I'd like to show you, I'd like to share with you a definition of a tzuas ha'odam, a human being, the way Rav Wolbe understood it. If you get this point, then the clarity will become much quicker and much easier to access, much easier. And explain to you what Rav Wolbe had said. Actually, these words which I'm saying to you also appear in the very beginning of Alei Shur, the 2nd volume, the book of Rav Wolbe. He explains as follows. We see in the Torah HaKadosh different types of human beings. We see something like Adam Arisha and Adam. We see a Noach. We see an Avram. We see Yitzchak. We see Yaakov. We see Yosef. We see Moshe. We see these are great, great personalities and great tzaddikim in Klal Yisrael. We also learned that there were certain types of people like Cain and Lavan and Esav and Bilam and Lavan and Paroi. These are people as well. These are Rishoim. And there are 2 types of people. You can pick up quite clearly in the Chumash, learning Chumash. There was somebody called Tzadikim and somebody called Rishoim. But then Rav Wolbe makes a beautiful point and said, but none of these personalities are called Odom. There was only one particular person in the Torah HaKadosh who is called an Odom. And we don't find that until we come to the Sefer Yecheskel. Yecheskel the Novi, Ezekiel the prophet, was called in the 2nd chapter, V'ato ben Odom, amoid al raglecha, stand up. Why was Yecheskel called an Odom? And Rav Wolbe made a beautiful point. He mentioned as follows, meaning if we are going to have clarity before we come to after Purim, and we must, what is the definition of an Odom? Who is an Odom? Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and all these other personalities were not called Odom, but Yecheskel was called an Odom for the following reason. Rashi mentions there was one particular point which Yecheskel, he saw the most incredible vision. He saw the Maisa Merkava, he saw everything by the Kisei HaKob. He was shown an incredible vision of exactly what happens in Shamayim. And at the same time, says Rashi, he was also a boss of Adam. He was a human being. Meaning as follows. An Adam is somebody who has tremendous, tremendous views, tremendous opinions. He's tremendously wise, but at the same time he's a human being. Meaning, somebody who is gifted and shown tremendous, tremendous insight and prophecy, but at the same time, he acts as a humble man, like a human being. Remember, the same definition is also said by Moshe Rabbeinu when he went up to the Har HaSinai, and all the Malachim told him, what is a Ben Adam doing here? You're right, he was a human being, but at the same time, he had tremendous hasod, a great person. And Rav Wolbe mentions as follows. The reason why Yecheskel was called a Ben Adam is for the following reason. He had tremendous seichel. He was shown tremendous things. At the same time, his midas, his character personality, and his development as a person, he was tremendously humble. And that is the definition. The difference between a great man in the Klal Yisrael and a great man by the Ummah Yisrael is as follows. You find many, many people by the nations who are tremendously powerful, unbelievably wise, great people in the world, great composers, great scientists, great writers, great musicians. They're tremendous in their seichel. Their seichel is very high, but their behavior doesn't necessarily match that way. And that's the point. In the Torah HaKadosh, you're required to excel in the 2 areas. Your chokhmah, your asoga, your insight and your enlightenment is very high, but that's what Yecheskel and Moshe Rabbeinu were. In their behavior, they were very humble and modest. And that is the definition of an Adam. If we can get that definition clear, then we will reach tremendous clarity of vision I'm suggesting after Purim, in this whole tishtush of Techumim, in the smudge frontiers. What is a great man in our terminology? What is how would we define someone who's a great man in the Torah Kedosha? Not the way the Ummah are a great scientist, great runner, great sportsman, great politician, great diplomat, a very wealthy man. That might be somebody who's reached great heights. What about his personality and his character traits that he had? There is a Gemara in Chulin. The Gemara brings down in Daf Peites as follows. The Almighty says as follows: I had tremendous desire and love and affection for people like Avram Avinu. Abraham turned around and said, "V'anachnu ofa v'efa." We are dust and ashes. He was shown he was the most original thinker in the world, but he turned around and said, "I'm dust and ashes. I'm nothing." Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron turned around and said, "V'anachnu ma." What are we? We are nothing at all. No. David HaMelech, the great King David, who was called the greatest maskil, the great understanding, the man with great discernment. V'anochi tolas. I'm a worm. Meaning they were shown tremendous things, but their behavior was so modest and humble in their ways. Is that a beautiful definition? And that is the definition of greatness. But we find, says the Gemara, in other nations, Nimrod was shown tremendous things, and yet he rebelled against HaKadosh Baruch Hu and made a tower against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Look at Paro, who is Hashem, and I listen to him. Hiram, the king of Tyre, who Shlomo HaMelech worked together with him to build the Beis HaMikdash, he said, I am like Elokim. I mean, these people were given tremendous privileges and great distinction, but their behavior didn't match. And that is the definition of an Odom. I'm suggesting our smudging of the frontiers when we leave Purim has to be clarity. What does it mean a great man by the Ummah Sa'olam, by the nations of the world? And what does it mean by a great man in the Torah Kedosha? His personality is very great. He's worked on himself. I was thinking to myself when I was preparing this shir, it's interesting, the Yortzeit of Moshe Feinstein, Zecher Tzadik V'Afa, comes out on Tanis Esther. There's a definition. Someone had tremendous understanding in Torah, and yet his behavior was so incredible modest, and his humility was phenomenal. I remember hearing a story. I had a friend, when I used to live in Yerushalayim, who turned around to me and said he was once walking on the side of the street with Moshe, and a car passed by, and the car window dropped down, and someone called out, Moshe, 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 I think Moshe, Moshe. And Moshe turned around and says, I'm here. Someone was calling his son. He said, Moshe, Moshe. And Moshe thought he was calling him. Moshe, Moshe. He said, unbelievable humility of the man. He felt nothing in himself. And yet he's a Posek Hador. I mean, that is, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe Feinstein matches Purim, meaning we see the greatness of a human being in the Torah HaKadosh. That's an Odom here. Someone like Avram Avinu, someone like a Moshe Rabbeinu, someone like a David. And that's the greatness of a human being. And that, I think, is the most important definition to make a distinction between the nations of the world and the splendor, the majesty of Torah. There should be no zilzal in our mind of what it means, the greatness and the splendor and the importance of the Torah Kedosha. Our molek in our terminology is when we look at other people in the world, other nations and other diplomats, and we think there's some greatness inside them. What does it mean to be great in the Torah Kedosha? For that, I would like to bring you certain examples. I don't want to spend too much time showing how the lowness is and the debasement of the Ummah Sa'olam. It seems to me in our times here, politicians use their whole forum in order to bring down the other side. We don't have to talk about that. Just concentrate on what's good about it, rather than pushing down the other people. You'll realize from the points which I'm bringing, from the three areas which I'd like to discuss with you, from these three areas, you'll see the greatness, what does it mean by you'll have no tish-tush, you'll have no smudging, there'll be no blurring when you realize these three areas. What does it mean? And that's our mechias hamolik. I'm suggesting that is how we blot out Amalek. That is our clarity of vision that we need. Our clarity will come when we have these three areas clear. The first one I'd like to suggest is as follows. In the Torah HaKadosh, you have something called the purity of a deed, something which is done in the most beautiful way, with tremendous, genuine integrity behind it all. Meaning, when someone acts with human sacrifice, Mesiras Nefesh, and does something lishma, when someone behaves like that, then there is tremendous importance. There's something called a purity of a deed, which you see in the Torah HaKadosh, something done with great self-sacrifice, and done for the Shem Shemaim, for the right purposes. I was thinking, maybe it's something like this. Every morning when you come to daven, the real purity of the thought comes out as follows. If you can say Psukei de Zimra, all the sentences from Baruch She'amar until Ashrei, until Yishtabach, with great kavanah, with care, that is called Avodah L'Shem Shamayim, because then you come to Birchas Kriya Shema and Shemoneh Esrei. If you can say these words with purpose, with understanding and sincerity, then you can come to daven Shemoneh Esrei later. But you need clarity and purity of thought when you come to say it. That will bring you to say daven properly. If you can say these words carefully about the greatness of the Almighty, and that's what Psukei de Zimra is all about. If you can say these words with great clarity and great devotion, then you can come to daven properly as well. But let me give you some examples which made such an impression on me. What does it mean to do something with the purity of a deed? A few weeks ago, I was asked by a friend if I would become a witness under the chuppah, an aide under the chuppah for a friend. And I went under the chuppah, and as I was standing there by the chuppah, the Rav, who was Masadik Kedushin, turned around to me and said to me, "Are you an aide? Are you a witness for this wedding?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "If that's the case, then you must do tshuva before you become a witness." I said, "Okay, I'll do tshuva." No, he said, "Not, but tshuva shlema, real repentance." I was shocked when he turned around to me and said, "My father was also a Rav. He was a great Rav from France, Rav Rottenberg from Paris." He said to me as follows: "My father insisted that in order to be an aide, you have to do tshuva, not tshuva shlema, complete repentance." I stood there, I shaked a little bit, and he said, "Do tshuva shlema." I said to him, "I'll try and do tshuva shlema." Now you can be a witness. That's purity of the deed, no? In order to be a witness under the chuppah, you have to be completely pure and genuine to do that. I thought to myself afterwards, I went over to the Baal Simcha, I said, "Thank you for letting me be a witness under your chuppah. I did tshuva shlema. I hope I did tshuva shlema." I was standing under the chuppah. Let me give you another example, which is a beautiful case, I think, where it says to appreciate something which is well done, something which is really genuine, something which is very beautiful. We see in the Gemara, we see in the Megillah, this is a comment which I saw by the great Reb Shimon Schwab, which is a beautiful point, which we see in Megillah Esther. We see in the Megillah Esther that at different points in the Megillah, Esther follows exactly what Mordechai tells her to do. Let me give you an example. Reb Shimon Schwab mentions about this is here something which is done with great self-sacrifice and purity. We see in the Megillah as follows, that Mordechai told Esther not to say where she came from. He said to her as follows, in Perek Beis, Pasuk Kof, Ein Esther Magedes Maladato. Esther didn't say where she came from. Mordechai told her what to do. You must not tell where you came. Esther listened very carefully to what Mordechai told her. Mordechai was one of the members of the Sanhedrin. Esther followed exactly what Mordechai said. Who was giving the orders? Mordechai was giving the orders, and Esther listened very humbly to her. Later on in the Megillah, when Esther was told to go into Achashverosh, and she listened carefully, she went into Achashverosh, we see something very interesting. In Perek Daled, Pasuk Tes Zayin, listen to what happened here. Esther turned around and said to all the Jews, Leich kanoises kol hayudim. She told Mordechai to gather all the Jews together. Then the Pasuk says, all of a sudden Esther is giving the orders, and this great man from the Sanhedrin, listen to this woman inside. Since when does Esther give orders? Said Shimon Schwab, most beautiful point. Esther had done something with great purity of thought, great purity, she'd done with Mesiras Nefesh. Esther now was on the Darga to give orders to Mordechai. That's what happens. When you are on the level to do something of such a high level of self-sacrifice, when you can do that, Esther even gave orders to a member of the Sanhedrin, meaning that purity of the deed lifts you up to such an incredible high level of purity and kedusha, purity and deed. She was prepared to go in. She went into Mordechai, went into Achashverosh. That shows the great purity which was behind Esther. No, beautiful point. You see that. You must be clear. You can't have any smudging when it comes to something which is done so with such purity of thought and such great deed. I don't know if you've heard the Hesped, the funeral oration, which the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir Yeshiva in Brooklyn, Reb Elia Brudny Shlita, the Rav there gave a Hesped for Reb Matisyahu Salomon. And this is really what the whole Hesped is about. He said one particular point. He said he was amazed by Reb Matisyahu Salomon for one particular point. He was overwhelmingly concerned for every member of the Jewish nation. There was no distinction, there was no division, there was no separation. Everybody in Klal Yisrael was very important for him. And Reb Brudny went on, he doesn't know of anybody like that. Someone at 2:30 in the morning, at 6 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is, if someone is in need, he was there for the person. Tremendous self-sacrifice that Matisyahu had. He then mentioned a beautiful point. He said there was a certain incident several years ago. I think it was in the time, I'm not sure, of Rabin, when he was Prime Minister in Israel. Rav Brudi mentioned as follows. One of the decisions was made by the Knesset that they would give back land on the Golan back to Syria. They would give back land. When Matisyahu heard about that, he said he made a certain Knesset tefillah in Lakewood, which is far away. But he was so concerned. What will be with the residents on the Golan? What will be with them? He was so concerned, even though it was miles away. He didn't live in Israel. He lived in Lakewood, New Jersey. His concern was phenomenal. And that's where you see. You must realize the purity of the deed is tremendous in Klal Yisrael. And that's where the Odom comes out. The great hasagas and the humility, meaning the purity of the deed is there. You must recognize that. If you don't recognize that, then you'll have tremendous tishtush. You'll be very confused and smudged. What does it mean by the Umas Ha'olam and the splendor of the Kedusha of Klal Yisrael? You must be clear on that. Last week, I decided to myself, I must go to the bris of Reb Tzvi Kushalevsky Shlita, the Rosh Hashiva in Har Nof. I must go. A man of 88 has a child. I'm sure the bris will be fabulous. I wasn't in any way upset. I went early in the morning at 6:50 and I davened there in yeshiva, and the place was absolutely packed at the time of the bris. But let me tell you what happened at the bris. This man of 88 was blessed with a child after so many years of waiting for a child. I'll be honest with you, I don't think the simcha was in any way just his simcha. He made sure that this simcha was a simcha of kavod shamayim, honor to the Almighty, that he answered his prayers. And he was concerned really with one particular point, the great tragedy and the troubles and the war which is going on. And continually we were davening for Klal Yisrael at each point, meaning at every opportunity. When a young man who has a child, so he makes a bris. When this Adam Godel of 88 makes a bris, his whole thought, his whole direction, his whole thought was on one point. His mindset was, what's with Klal Yisrael? What's with the nation of Israel? People are at war. People, they are mothers, the sick people in Klal Yisrael. He turned around and said, the Gabbai turned around just before the bris was taking place. He said, the Rosh Hashiva asked, as soon as everybody here in the hall, in the yeshiva, there must have been over 1,000 people and people outside as well. It was a phenomenal atmosphere. The Rosh Hashiva turned around, but Tzvi turned around and said as follows, I would ask everybody, the minute you hear the child crying, I would like everybody here in the hall to say the Yud Gimel Midas Hashem Shem Ke'Elachum Mechanun, and to say Achenu B'nei Yisrael for all of Klal Yisrael. Meaning a child is crying, and we know there's a moment of tremendous tefillah and Rachmei Shamayim. Ask for Klal Yisrael. Say the Yud Gimel Midas Hashem should have Rachamim on us, and ask for Achenu B'nei Yisrael Hanusunim Batzor Rabbi. Everybody screamed out the Yud Gimel Midas. It wasn't a simcha just for Reb Tzvi. It was for all of Klal Yisrael. His concern for all of Klal Yisrael came out when he said Ona Hashem Moshiana. It was for all of the people who are sick and people who are caught. At the end of the simcha, Rabbi Isai, Tzvi turned around and said as follows. This is what I want. The purity of the deed was so phenomenal. Tzvi turned around and said as follows. It's not possible for everybody to come over to me to say Mazel Tov. I don't want everybody to crush. There'll be a crush. I would like to say as follows. I would like to thank everybody for coming to my simcha. And then he said as follows. If there's any person in this room who needs a shidduch, Hashem should give him a shidduch. If a couple needs a child, Hashem should grant you a child. If someone doesn't have parnosa, he should have parnosa. If someone can't learn properly, he should set in his learning. If someone doesn't have good, whatever you need. He went through all the lists of needs of everybody needs something, and gave a bracha to every single person. It was a phenomenal occasion. The care and the concern, and we were singing of the songs of Klal Yisrael, of Tiftach Shari, Shamayim Pesach. We were singing all for Klal Yisrael and Achenu B'nei Yisrael. He directed the whole mood of the simcha towards the needs and the difficulties of Klal Yisrael. And that tremendous purity of the deed. I'm saying exactly like Reb Matisyahu as well, exactly the same as Esther. When a person can do something with great purity, that Rabbi side, there's no tishtush, there's no smudging, there's no blurring of any frontiers. You see someone coming out with tremendous hasagas and the humility as well. You're thinking of other people, you're thinking of the Almighty, and you're thinking of Klal Yisrael at such a time. The purity of the deed, there should be no smudging. You don't find that by the nations of the world. You find that by Klal Yisrael, the Mesiras Nefesh, the sacrifice. Someone like Avraham Avinu who said, "V'anachnu ochel v'eifa." Someone like Nebuchadnezzar who came around and said, he himself is God. You find that difference. That difference must be very clear. You have to be very sharp and understand clearly. This is nations of the world, and this is Umas Ha'olam. There should be no tishtush in that. The second area which I like to bring out is the whole concept which we find in Klal Yisrael, which I think needs great clarity. Otherwise you can make a mistake. The world as we see outside, and the world of the market, the world of the business, the world downtown, is the secular world. But in the Torah HaKadosh, you have something quite different. You have something called a world of Kedusha. We know the definition of holiness in the Torah HaKadosh means something which is separate, some which is apart. It's not the same as a secular world. In order to have clarity of vision and have no tish-tush and have no smudging, you must understand concepts of Kedusha, of holiness, and keep them quite separate from something which is secular and choil. If you can't do that, you have tremendous smudging. You will feel maybe like a grasshopper. You will feel like maybe amazed and overwhelmed by the secular world if you don't keep in mind the concepts of Kedusha, something which is quite separate. And we find quite clearly there are different areas where you see tremendous Kedusha. You must understand that. You walk inside a shul, that is a mokum of Kedusha. When you walk inside a shul, that is not like the high street, it's not like a shop. Walking into a shul is the center of the Shekhinah in that community. You must recognize that. You have something, a mokum called Kedusha. It's not the same as an office, it's not the same as a shopping center. It's a mokum of Kedusha. You have something which are times of Kedusha, which you have Shabbos Kodesh. I don't know if you ever read the articles which go around very often about Rabbi Avigdor Miller Zichrono Livracha. I think a few weeks ago on Parshas Vayakel, on the booklet which was given out by Rabbi Avigdor Miller, he mentions as follows, a beautiful point. When it came to the building of the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the Midbar, Klal Yisrael were told, you must stop all work when it comes to Shabbos. Why? Because there's something called a tabernacle of Shabbos and a tabernacle of the Midbar. And the tabernacle which they built in the Midbar, there must be no work done on Shabbos, because you have something called a time period of Kedusha, meaning Shabbos is a Mishkan. You come into Shabbos within time. The time is quite different. You don't talk about business. You don't talk about money. You don't talk about commerce. You don't talk about politics. There's a time area of Kedusha, which is quite different. By the Ummah Ha'olam, by the nations, you don't have that sort of thing. And if you don't recognize the nature of something which has a time period of Kedusha, you can have tremendous smudging. This is Shabbos and this is Chol. And if you get that division clearly, there's no smudging. Shabbos has a time, like a shul is a mokum of Kedusha, so there's a time period of Kedusha. Take it a bit further. Marriage in the Jewish religion is completely different by the Torah Kedosha. John and Mary get married, it's what? It's a loving twosome. John loves Mary, Mary loves John. That's the way it goes. By the Torah Kedosha, it's something else. It's a holy threesome. There's Avraham and Sarah, and there's the Almighty in the middle. Meaning you don't grow together like a straight line, like John and Mary. Maybe they love each other, they don't love each other. That's the nature. But by the Torah Kedosha, it's a triangle. They grow together with the Almighty in the middle. That relationship is a relation of Kiddushin. And that's why when a woman becomes married, she's called an Isha Mukudeshes. She changes her whole status. She's no longer a woman, a normal woman. She becomes an Isha Mukudeshes. She has holiness to her. And one has to recognize that. The relationship of marriage is not a relationship of secular, like by the nations of the world. We have something called a relationship which is holy, which is incredibly powerful here. One must have no smudging on that. The marriage is a relationship, a connection of tremendous holiness inside there. You also have articles which have holiness to them, a Sefer Torah, Tefillin, a Siddur. When it falls on the floor, you kiss it. Why? Simply because it has Kedusha. These are all entirely different lifelines here. Entirely different. By the nature of this other world, you can have smudging. If you don't recognize these areas of Kedusha, a time, a place, an article, a relationship, you become very smudged. You don't realize with clarity of vision exactly what it means to have Kedusha inside your life. And that's very different. I'd like to share with you a final thought when it comes to Kedusha, which I think is a beautiful point as well. If you like to look it up, it's a beautiful comment which is made by the great Rav Chaim Volozhin, the student of the Vilna Gaon. He says it in his Sefer Nefesh HaChaim. It's in Shah Aleph, Perek Vov, the 6th chapter there, in a footnote. Rav Chaim Volozhin mentions as follows. You know how many times during the day we say the words, Asher Kiddishana b'mitzvah v'tzivonu? Says Rabbi Chaim as follows. When a person moves towards doing a mitzvah, which is Asher Kiddushan mitzvah Tzivanu, before you even do the act, there is a certain aura of Kedusha which comes under the neshama of that person. When you haven't done it yet, you didn't even say Asher Kiddushan, but you move towards, for example, Al Netilas Yadayim, or Lasa B'Divrei Torah, whatever the mitzvah is. Before you come to do the mitzvah, there is an aura of Kedusha. When you do the mitzvah, says Rabbi Chaim, then there's a whole seal which is put on the neshama of that that person, and you are a ben olam haba in Gan Eden when you do it. And that gives tremendous momentum for other actions in the ruach of kedusha, which is a tremendous thought. Do you know what you're living in? There's no smudging there. That one has to realize, what does it mean? Before you do it, as you've done the act, and afterwards, there's a tremendous momentum which comes out. It's kedusha. It's not choil, and one can't have smudging. One mustn't be blurred. It must be very clear and acute and sharp. What does it mean an action which has kedusha and an action which doesn't have that? And those are the points which I like to bring out. The first is the purity of the deed. The second is kedusha. The last area, which is I like to mention to you, where there should be no smudging. One has to be very clear. This is the nations of the world, and this is Klal Yisrael. And the nature of Amalek is to blot out. It smirches. It blackens in some way what kedusha. And once you realize what this is, you suddenly have tremendous respect and admiration. What does it mean? The standards of kedusha and Klal Yisrael. That, I think, Rabbi Isai, is our mechias Amalek. That is blotting out Amalek. And this is part of the Nenu Misuda Sachashrev. They benefit from the Suda. They didn't realize what does it mean, the purity and the kedusha of Klal Yisrael. I'd like to take this area itself. It's a little bit long, but I think if you hear this point, you'll gain tremendously. The Rambam, in his Sefer Minyan HaMitzvahs, asks the following question, right at the very beginning. How is it that the Rabbanim were able to order certain Yom Tovim, which are in addition to the Tariq mitzvahs that we have? You can't add on, you can't add on, and you can't detract from anything in Torah. Where did the rabbis get the license to add on any Yom Tov? For example, where did they get the reshus to make a Yom Tov called Purim from? Purim is after the Tariq mitzvahs. Where did they get that from? And the Rambam says as follows. The basis and the origins of something like Purim and Chanukah all comes from one sentence which is in Devarim. Ki mi goy goda is a great nation in the world, asher lo elakim kroivim elav, that they are so close to the Almighty, b'chol kareinu elav, whenever they call to Him. That's the nation of it. Meaning that when you have a time with great sorrow and you call to the Almighty, Purim is an example of that. Purim is an example of a nation, a great nation, who can call to the Almighty. Since they can call to the Almighty in prayer, therefore they are called a great nation. And and that's what Purim is. And that's what Esther said to the Sanhedrin. These are matters of fasting and crying, meaning because of the prayer, so the Klal Yisrael were answered in Shushan. Rabbeinu Bachai asked a question. Why are the Jewish nation called Mi Goy Goda? They're not a great nation. They're one of the smallest nations in the world. Why do you call Klal Yisrael a Goy Goda? Why are they called Goda? Says Rabbeinu Bachai. Such a beautiful point. He says as follows. The reason why Klal Yisrael are called Goy Goda, because they practice charity. They practice chesed in such a beautiful way. We know the Almighty is tremendously hu heitiv, hu meitiv, hu yetiv lanu. He has tremendous goodness. Olam chesed yiboneh. There's no nation in the world, says Rabbeinu Bachai, who practices chesed like Klal Yisrael, and that is the greatness. That is the great distinction. No nation has that level of charity and kindness and chesed and tzedakah like Klal Yisrael. That is the reason, and that's why we call them Mi Goy Goda. Such a beautiful point. There should be no smudging. Recognize what does it mean? The glory and the splendor of Klal Yisrael, the ability to do chesed. We mentioned in a shir several weeks ago the beautiful point of Reb Yerucham. He explained as follows. Every single person is nothing more than just a pipe, a tzinor. You have certain things which you can pass on to other people. Maybe a parent, maybe a teacher, maybe a husband, maybe a wife, a neighbor, whatever it is. Everyone should regard themselves as a tzinor, a pipe, to pass on to other people whatever you have. You can have, but Matisyo explained on that, you can have sometimes a leakage in the pipe. Maybe when you kept some of the honor for yourself and you didn't give it all over to somebody else. Or you can have a blockage in the pipe. You didn't give everything over that you could give over to somebody else. But the point is a beautiful point. The nature of Bnei Yisrael are to be kind, to be benevolent, to be deliberate, to give over to other people. And that is a beautiful feature, the chesed of Klal Yisrael. I remember when I used to live in Haunof. The great Rosh Yeshiva was living there at the time, Reb Moshe Shmuel Shapira, the Rosh Yeshiva of Be'er Yaakov. I remember he mentioned once at a Kiddush on Shabbos morning a beautiful point which made a tremendous impression on me. He said, At the beginning of the Second World War, the King of England, I think it was King George at the time, made a declaration, asked the British nation to help in the war effort. He asked for people to give money in order to support the British government because of the war effort. He asked for people to make contributions. And he said as follows, I think the sum, if I can remember correctly, he said, £50,000 was raised from all of the United Kingdom to help in the war effort. £50,000 by us, we'd be embarrassed to say such amount. For a war effort, people come forward, that's all they can give. By us, these amounts are minimal. They're not even, there would be a disgrace to mention it. No? £50,000 in a war effort, that's what the nation can give. Can you imagine what it means by klal? What does it mean, the giving, the ability to give over, the tzinor, to hand over to others? That is a great quality in Klal Yisrael. There should be no smudging, no blurred of like, what does it mean, the character of chesed? Because that is the reason why we're called a goy godel. We're godel because we have the ability of the Almighty to be giving of the karach of chesed. These are the three areas which I thought I would choose to show you there should be no tishtush hatchumim. The first is the purity of the deed, which you find in the Torah Kedosha. The second is the whole world and the demeanor of something called kedusha, of holiness. And the third area is the world of chesed, which is so different. There should be no smudging. One should realize exactly, and that is where I'm suggesting mechias amalek, blotting amalek. That's where we need clarity of vision. There should be no smudging. We should realize almost olam are one thing, and that's the problem which Purim came out. They were nenu. They looked at the Ummah Olam and they said, "Who are we? We are grasshoppers. We are nothing in comparison to the Ummah Olam." Once you start thinking like that, then you're into the world of the zilzul, the hardcore zilzul, the hardcore debasing comes from Amalek. But there is a fraction when we think less of the purity and the splendor and the majesty of Klal Yisrael. When you think less, then you're into Amalek, and that's, I'm suggesting Poran, the Bale Machloikis Bale Lashon Ho. When you think less and you degrade and you downgrade, what does it mean? The standards of kedusha, of holiness, of purity, then you're downgrading Klal Yisrael. That is our mechias amalek, and that is the clarity of vision, which I think we must take out. That is the meaning of, in the times of Purim, that's what they benefited. They looked and they saw and they felt, and because of that, they felt less in Klal Yisrael. One shouldn't feel like that. One should feel very, very clear. I'd like to mention, on Yom Kippur, when it comes to Kol Nidre, and we say about all our vows, Kulam b'teilim lo sharirin b'lo kayomin. All their vows should be b'teilim mutolim lo. They shouldn't exist at all. You should know all the standards of the Ummah Ha'olam, all their tishtush. It will all be b'teilim mutolim. It will all be completely annulled when it comes to the times of Mashiach. V'hay Hashem lemelech al kol haaretz. I'm suggesting, Rabbi say, chap on now, grasp now the great standards of Klal Yisrael, so one won't feel embarrassed and regret when it comes to the time of Mashiach, when you'll see they're all b'teilim. There's nothing there in their standards. What we have in the Torah Kedosha, not to be not to be overwhelmed, not to be say something is something special, not to feel like a grasshopper in front of the Ummah Olam. I think that's a problem in Greece, that was a problem in Germany. I think that's still a problem nowadays in England and America as well. They become so impressed by the pageantry, by the pomp and the glory of the Ummah Olam, the money. It's not something. We have to recognize what Klal Yisrael is. It's interesting, do you remember the episode when Eliyahu was on Har HaKarmel and he turned around to the people and said as follows, he said, Baboy, Im Lashem, Lashem, Im Labal, Labal. Be clear exactly, are you going to Hashem or are you going to Baal? I think that's exactly what's going on here. The tishtush, the smudging, which side are you on? Do you recognize the Kedusha and the Chesed and the purity of the deed in Klal Yisrael? Or Labal? Or have you gone to Amalek? Have you gone to the other nations of the world? That, I think, is our clarity of vision when it comes to after Purim. I think that's what our Shushan Purim should be like. That is how we leave. We leave Pesach, we know where we're going from. We leave Yom Kippur, we leave Sukkot. Purim is so short, and it's such a balagan, it's such a hefkewas. The razamataz, everything gets confused, it goes in and out, and you lost Purim. But we shouldn't feel like that. We should feel we gain from Purim. What did we gain? We have clarity of vision. We know exactly what to do, and we have the clarity of understanding these points which we brought out. I hope these points have helped you, and you'll walk away from Purim, Emet Hashem, with clarity of vision and no smudging of the borders at all. Emet Hashem, I'm hoping to be in Lakewood, New Jersey, from April the 21st until May the 12th. If you're interested in my coming into your community, my email address is yalpren, YALPREN, RBS @gmail.com. yalprenrbs @gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. Bracha v'hatzlocha and a freilichen after Purim. Kol tov.